Okay, so we're going to get started today. We're going to talk today about logo design, which is kind of a nice extension from the pen tool practice that we did last class. I'm going to work through in Illustrator. We'll talk about a few other tools. We'll talk about combining paths together and how you might cut something out of something else. We use the Pathfinder tools to do some of that. So I'll walk through that in terms of the Illustrator demonstration. But I want to talk for a while about logos. And I think logos is a great little microcosm of design in general. And whether you're an architect or whether you're a graphic designer or whether you're an industrial designer, you end up coming up with this brand of yourself and this logo that represents who you are. And that logo evolves over time and it changes over time. And eventually you go to work for a firm and that firm's logo then starts to brand you. And you have a unique opportunity right now, being in school, to kind of think about who you are and how do you brand yourself and what your logo should look like. Some of you have taken 130. As part of 130, you have to do your little logo. Anybody do that, right? You may or may not have been happy with it. It kind of depends on how complex it was and how many thousand times you had to draw it as to how happy you were with it. But I want today to take a step back and think about logos in general. I'll show you a bunch of examples of logos. I'll also talk about what the current design trends are in logos. But fundamentally, a really good logo is something that is very distinctive, something that's appropriate, something that's kind of practical, and it's usually very graphic. It's usually something that's very striking. It's usually pretty simple. The more complicated they get, the less intriguing they become, though there are some examples that I will show you that ended up being rather complicated that are still very recognizable. And it somehow conveys an intended message. So if you're an architectural designer or you're a designer in general, somehow that logo should reflect the fact that you're a designer. It should somehow be related. So I'm going to throw up tons and tons of logos. I mean, when you start thinking about logos, you realize that logos are everywhere. They're on everything. And there are some that are more memorable than others. And so as I start to throw these logos up, it's just to get your brain thinking through. I mean, my guess is that you at least ran across a couple of these this morning already, coming to school. Probably not the Rolling Stones logo, but you get there. Simplicity. So the thing about a logo is it needs to be easily recognizable and easily distinguishable as that's that brand. I know that brand. I know what it is. And that's a good sign of a good logo. It's versatile and it's also memorable. It's something that's imprinted in your brain such that you remember it over and over and over again. And it's usually something that can be unique or unexpected or somehow is attractive in some way. So for example, does this have absolutely anything to do with coffee? Nope. Does everybody know what that logo is? Yep. So it's a really effective logo. It's probably more complicated than it needed to be, but it works really well as a logo. It's a brand recognizable logo. And you'll see I'll throw up a bunch of these today where you can't go 2 blocks without seeing this logo. And so you certainly have an understanding of that logo. I'll throw up other ones that were example logos that are just kind of goofy, but they're kind of cool in the same way too. Enduring. So I'm going to show you at the end of the lecture today all the 2018 logo design trends. But the best logos are the ones that last over time, that don't need major changes over time. Because if you identify, in this case, let's say a company, and you identify that company by a specific logo, if that company's still around in 50 years, is that logo appropriate in 50 years? So something that's simple, like the Twitter logo, let's say that they happen to be around that long, 20 years from now. Is that logo relatively timeless? Yeah. Could you make a few evolutions to it? Yeah, probably. Is the Starbucks logo relatively timeless? Yeah, probably. What about the first ever Apple logo? So what if this was on the backside of my computer? Or what if this was on the backside of all your phones? Is that an enduring, long-lasting logo? Not so much. So we went from the first Apple logo way back when. This is for whatever reason it just fits so well because it's so not the Apple logo. And then we evolve into the rainbow Apple logo, 1976 to 1998. Company almost dies right then in 1998. Steve Jobs comes back, and from 1998 to 2000, they switched it over to just the black Apple. 2001 to 2007, it got really shiny. 2007 to about 2014, they toned down the shininess a little bit, 2013-ish, and then they went back to the simple Apple. But now it's the white Apple on the black background versus the other way around. But they've simplified. We'll talk about colors next class. Logo design process. So we start with the design brief. We move into the research phase, followed by the reference phase. This is similar to the graphic design process that I talked about earlier a couple lectures ago. Then we get into sketching and conceptualizing your design. Finally, we get into reflection and ultimately a presentation of whatever that logo would be. So here it is in the amount of time. Notice that the amount of time spent is focused on the sketching and conceptualizing. That's the big chunk of time. No surprise. So design brief. So you're going to question your client. Let's say you're hired to do a logo design. Obviously, you want to sit down with your client and have an understanding of what this company does, what this person does, and how that logo should reflect what it is that they do. Be certain to include where it's going to be used. You want to talk to them about where is this logo going to end up being. Is it going to go on a T-shirt? Is it going to go on, a business card? Is it going to go on paper? I don't know. Find out where that's going to be. It's also probably a good time to talk about how much you're going to get paid to do it. You might as well throw that one in there too, because we all can't work for free. Then we get into this research phase, and this is actually kind of fun. So you figure out what else is going on in this industry. If you're an architecture design firm, what other logos are being used? Let's find out some research. What other logos are used in the industry? Also, what other logos has the company ever used? What other logos has that company used? In this case, for what you're doing today, the logo design that you're doing, did you already have one for 130? Did you already do a logo? How happy were you with it? Is it time to make the big drastic change from the first Apple logo to the second Apple logo? Were you unhappy with the first one? Is there a better one that's out there for you? What are other students doing? What are other competing architecture firms doing? That's a good way of judging what your logo should look like. Then we get into reference phase. This is just filling your brain with other information. What's out there? What other logos are cool? Google's awesome here. Google search, images, logos, logo design trends, any of those Google searches will throw back tons and tons of information. So what are the current styles? Is it flat? Is it made up of lines? Are the outlines thick or thin? Does it have color gradients? What are kind of the trends? And do you really want to follow those trends? And you could think about whether you want to follow those trends or not. Then we get into sketching and conceptualizing. This is where you start to try to figure out what's going on. What are you trying to do? What's this design going to look like? Just throw out ideas. This is ideas after ideas after ideas. And you're going to spend a lot of time today in this phase trying to figure out what looks good and what doesn't look good. And that's to be expected. Fall back on your research and reference steps. Go back and look at your other designs. Go back and look at what's going on in the industry. Come back and work on it some more. Produce lots and lots of ideas, and then we move into the next phase. Oops, sorry, wrong direction. So here's a conceptual process on an example logo. Right? Start with a photograph, move into a hand sketch. Okay, this is kind of getting interesting. Maybe make it a little bit more graphic in its shapes, a little bit tighter, a little bit more graphic still. These are all in sketches. Then going into Illustrator, playing around with this in shapes, making some adjustments, working your way through, picking a font, getting the type right, doing different versions of the same logo, and then maybe extending it out to what it would look like if it were being used. In this context, stationery, envelope, business card. Again, example, it's not a real company. Another example here, initial sketches, and then some conceptual process here, working through the gradients. Fonts, remember typography is absolutely critical. These all look very, very similar, right? Almost identical. Which one is the right one? You have to try it out and see. You have to look at it and decide which one is the most appropriate font. I think this slide is particularly good because I like their take on what do I do if it's a black and white, or what if I do if it's a grayscale. So the primary image is obviously the color image up here at the top. But if we have to show it in black and white or in grayscale, how do you still show that same three-dimensionality without having to have the gradients, without just converting to black and white? And I think they did a really nice job with these little lines that are occurring here that give it the three-dimensionality without having to have the gradients. So those little lines made a big difference on this particular design. So sometimes switching from color to black and white involves a little bit of finesse or a little bit of change. And so don't be afraid of doing a separate color versus a black and white version. Then we get into reflection. And so this is absolutely essential. You need to be able to step back from your work. You need to look at it objectively, not as the designer anymore, but as somebody just seeing the logo for the first time, and see, is it working? Does it feel right? Does it fit what I'm trying to do? Ask your neighbors or your colleagues for their opinions. And this is, you'll actually read in the handout today, this is one of the steps in the handout that is required. You have to turn to your neighbor and ask them what they think of your logo. Like, it's actually mandated that you talk to your neighbor today. This is really important. I actually had a student who worked on a great logo. This is probably 2 or 3 semesters ago. She sat right over there. And she worked on this logo, and she spent 30 minutes working on this logo. It was turning out great. She felt awesome about it. She's like, this is great. She got to this phase, and she turned to her neighbor and said, hey, can you have a look? This is a great logo. And the neighbor looked over it and like, yeah, it's the Beats logo. She's like, wait, what? She Googles it, pulls it up. It's totally the Beats logo. You can't copy a logo, but at the same time, it was something she was doing entirely independent. I'm sure she'd seen it before, but somehow it fit with what she was doing, and she was really excited about it. And it takes that fresh perspective to see that it didn't quite match up, or that it was similar to some other logo. So that's why you have to get yourself out of being the designer and ask your neighbors and get a second opinion, etc. Receive that feedback. Don't get mad at your neighbor. No fist fights today over your logos, right? I want all hugs over logos, right? No, I'm just kidding. Ask your neighbor. Don't get mad at them. Have them give an honest assessment of what you think is working, what they think is not working. Give your neighbor an honest assessment. Don't just say, yeah, it looks great, when it looks awful. Right? That's almost worse. Don't say, oh, it's so pretty. No. Right? Be honest. Tell them that, it's really not working. Maybe you should do this, or maybe you should try that. Have you tried this? Those are all good suggestions. It's part of learning how to discuss in design terms. It's something you'll always have to do. Okay? So take that time and then revisit it. Do it again. Change it. Tweak it. Make a new one. It wouldn't be bad to come up with 3 or 4 logos today. I love this one. Sorry, it's blurry. Grab it with the little rabbit inside the hands. It's one of those double negative ones. Then you get to that presentation phase. This was that last phase. This is where you're actually showing your client. This is, of course, assuming that you're designing for somebody in particular. You're showing your client what the final design is going to be. And you really hope that they like it and they're going to buy into it. And if they don't, well, guess what? They hired you and you have to go back and do it again. And that's part of the process. They may have some feedback. They may want you to tweak a few things. This one's a pretty good one, the Mall of America one, because there's so many variants on the same basic concept. And the designers were very flexible in terms of how this particular thing could be used. This ribbon is consistent. The Mall of America font in black is consistent. But then they can vary it. They can vary it based on time of year or season. They can vary it. They can make it into backgrounds, big patterns. And it can be really small and little tiny pieces. The smallest one being just the logo itself right there. That's it. So this is a particularly flexible design, and I think that's a good one to kind of show you as to how you can extend the concept of a design in a logo. Learn from what others have done. What brands succeed and why. This is about as simple as you can possibly get as a logo, but it is one of the most effective logos that's ever been done. Everybody knows that this is the Nike logo. Does that have anything to do with Nike? No. Does it have anything to do with shoes? No. Does it say Nike on it? No. But it's completely synonymous with Nike shoes. That's a really effective logo. It's simple, clean, precise, and extremely effective. Typography, also important. If you're going to put fonts into a logo, you have to think really carefully about what font you're going to put into the logo. What's the right font? Will the font go out of style? Don't use Papyrus. It's out of style. I pick on Papyrus. It's not my favorite. Does it reflect your client or your business? You're not going to use Comic Sans on some kind of a financial magazine. It doesn't work. So does it reflect the appropriate design features of that particular business? You may have to make your own font to get the best results. And a lot of logo designers end up creating their own fonts, or at least creating the letter forms for that particular font. Remember, you can always, on these computers, load the custom fonts. We talked about that before. So if you need a particular custom font, you can do that. The little details matter. The kerning, the tracking, the spacing, all of that stuff really matters, especially in a logo with just a few characters to it. So here's a bunch of other examples. These logos are all just text, but they're very specific text. Walt Disney, for example, is a very specific text. You recognize that font. You could recognize, if it didn't say Disney, you could still recognize that that was somehow supposed to be Disney because it was the Walt Disney font. CNN, NASA, Coca-Cola, etc. So FedEx is a particularly fun one. So some of you have seen this before. Not all of you have seen this before. But I'm going to forever, for those of you that haven't seen this before, change how you look at the FedEx logo. There is something uniquely hidden inside the FedEx logo that many times you don't see. Ready? Mind blown. There's an arrow hidden inside the FedEx logo, moving things from one place to another. Brilliant in terms of logo design. Absolutely brilliant with that one little hidden gem in it. So if you can put something like that into your design, all the better. And people look at the FedEx logo all the time, and they don't see the arrow. And then all of a sudden, one day, it clicks, and you see it. You're like, oh my God. They move stuff from one place to another. It's brilliant, because it is. So if you can do something like that, all the better. Sometimes, a company might come up with, can you make a logo for a dynamic dust? How do you make a logo for that? It's a really hard concept. So sometimes you have to get creative. Avoid cliches. No light bulbs for ideas, no globes for internationals, no clip art. God help me. Don't go into Microsoft Word and pick some clip art as your logo. Guess what? Every computer has the same clip art on it. Not going to work. That's a sign that you're like some kind of backwoods, small home business. You didn't have a graphic designer, you just stuck that in there. No good. Don't copy another logo. It's totally obvious if you copy another logo. It already exists. Somebody got it first. So you need to make yours unique. That doesn't mean that there's a lack of ideas out there. There's still plenty of things that can work. Output files. I'm going to suggest today that you do a minimum of a 1500 pixel by 1500 pixel logo. Remember, though, based on what we talked about last class, what you're creating in Illustrator is a vector graphic. Right? It's not a raster graphic. So because it's a vector graphic, you can blow it up as big as you want. It can scale afterward. That's the advantage. So 1500 pixel by 1500 pixels, great. I suggest PNG because it preserves transparency. If you have a white background, it's just the letters. It ends up being a little bit more flexible. The fav icon is the little tiny icon on the website in the corner. It's itty bitty tiny. Sometimes thinking about your logo in that small pixelated format can help you think about it a little bit more. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. Just skip that part. Okay? Make sure you save your Adobe Illustrator file so that you can go back and make it bigger, re-export, etc. Also think about black and white, grayscale, and color. Do you need variance? Is it going to turn out the same if it's in black and white or in grayscale? I like that one. I think that's a pretty good one. That one's silly. Here's another set of conceptual drawings going all the way through the final. That was so like 2000, right? And the colors, the eBay colors. Same with the font. And then a modernization of that, and then ultimately the final design process, and then what it looks like in a business card. So previous lectures, I've shown the 2016 and 2017 design trends. As of this lecture, it's the first time I'm going to show the 2018 design trends because the design trends change. And so these are the current design trends. If you want to go back and see the old ones, you can look at the old lecture slides and see the old ones. But I figure I might as well be current in terms of what are out there. There's a great website. It's right here, logolounge.com. They actually publish a PDF version of this, but they also publish a very long worded article with the graphics in it that talks about in detail about all these logo design trends and how it changes from year to year. So if logo design becomes something that you're passionate about, reading this would be really beneficial. I'm giving you the very short summary version of a lot of these trends. Mostly, I'm just trying to let you see it. And so these shapes are all rounded corners. So they call this the tumbled design as a trend. The parallelogram, bits of parallelograms in each of these logos. And I'm showing you these to help you think through, well, what exactly do I want to have show up in my designs? The outline. All of these have that big, thick outline. There's actually a lot of big, thick lines in the 2018 design trends. So they're showing a lot of those big, thick lines as part of the logos. They call this one the modern religion. Lots of skulls and arrows and that sort of thing. Very light line weight. Neo-vintage. The black and white hipster. I like what they call these. It's kind of entertaining. So again, lots of line weight. Lots of lines. Not any color-filled regions. The established trademark. So you see on all of these, they say trademark or established in a certain year. That's becoming really popular. The purple. I think the idea here is that the subtle change from blue to purple. Right? It doesn't have to be blue to purple, but yellow to orange. It's a very short color gradient. You know, kind of orangey pink to pink. I mean, it's a very small gradient change, not a big gradient change. Gold. Gold's back in fashion, so why not throw a little gold in there? They call this one the fatty fade. These are the transitions between colors that are very similar. These are analogous colors. You're going from a dark blue to a medium blue to a light blue to a lighter blue. They're very close by colors. This is very similar to the next one, which is called the linear fade. The difference between the two is the white in between. So this particular one has the white spaces in between all of the fades versus this one where the fades go one to the next to the next. So subtly different. Field lines, again, lots more lines. You're seeing that there's a big trend toward lines. And so this one, we have filled regions, we have colored regions, but the lines are really fat and really thick. The danger here is that as the logos shrink down, the lines become too heavy, and you don't see enough of the color. So the opposite was true back when we had just the color fill regions with thin little outlines. Those would go away when it got too big. So you have to be careful as they get smaller. This one in particular, if that started to shrink down any more, it would start to all bunch together and become kind of a black blob. Cut. Little bits of text that have been cut off. This is still popular. I don't understand why it's popular. And that's the thing about design trends, is there are always design trends that we don't agree with. This happens to be one that bothers me. It's the same thing when websites started cutting out vowels. And like Flickr, you chop out the E, and it's like, well, I can't spell anyway. So now you're making it even harder because I don't know how to spell it. So on these ones, some of them are very successful, and they work really nicely with where the cuts are. Sometimes you can get overcut, and you end up losing too much of what the actual text is saying. Serif redo. I like this one. This is the idea that we've been so ingrained and so happy with our sans serif fonts that, well, wait a minute, maybe we should go back and look at that list of serif fonts. Chobani is actually a really good example, the yogurt. They just changed their logo. It's a product that you see every day. And they changed it, and I actually think their new logo is quite successful in terms of just adding a little bit of a serif to those pieces has helped a great deal. So going back and revisiting the idea of serif. And the last one I thought was kind of interesting, and that was adding punctuation. And this is not something that I've seen before, but the idea of adding a little bit of punctuation can really kind of extend the design process a little bit. Again, these are all text-based logos, not graphic-based logos, because it would be hard to have a graphic with a period after it. It wouldn't work as well. But maybe you want to try that. So those are the trends for 2018. I'm going to stop this, move over to the school computer, and we'll go through and I'll show you how to do some of this stuff on the school computer. And then you guys will be free to work on your own logo for today. So give me a second to switch over, and then we'll continue. All right, so we're going to get started over here creating our logos. I've gone ahead and I've double-clicked on Adobe Illustrator to open it up. And there we go. I'm going to go ahead and click on the Create New button. And this is kind of an interesting one. And we're going to talk about the difference between web and print next class when we talk about color spaces and colors in general. That's the colors lecture. But for right now, we really could be in any color space. We could do a print logo or we could do a web logo. The logos are going to end up going in a variety of places. So this is a tough one to pick one versus the other. I'm going to go ahead and go with web. And I'm going to specify here that this is 1500 pixels by 1500 pixels. So that's 1500 by 1500. I'm not going to worry about a bleed. None of that matters for right now. I could call this and I'll go ahead and create that file. All right. So now I've got my blank document set up here so that I can start to work on this particular logo. So as we work in logos, I'm going to start first by talking about how shapes combine. And we're going to use a tool palette called the Pathfinder tool palette to kind of work through this. And then I'll get into more specifics of the logos themselves. So I'm going to start with some basic shapes. So bear with me. These are not going to be the most attractive logos in the world as I start to create them. But I'm trying to show you the process here. So I'm going to come down here on the left side. I'm picking my rectangle tool. And I'll just draw a rectangle for right now. So I have the rectangle here. I'm not thrilled with the outline and the color. So with it selected, I'm going to change the color first. And I'm going to change the outline, or the stroke, to be none. So I have no outline. So all I have is just a red square. And actually, for the sake of making this easier to see, we'll make that red square a little bit bigger. There it is. So the next thing that I'll do is I'm going to create another shape. And I'm going to use the star tool just because this will be obvious. But I don't necessarily recommend using the star tool as the first way it goes. And I'm going to create a star that's over the top of this red shape. And I'm going to make that star a different color. So we'll make it blue for right now. And I'm going to make them overlap like that a little bit so we can start to see what happens with these two shapes. OK, let's go up to the Window menu here. And we're going to go to the Pathfinder right there. It's Shift-Control F9 if you want to use the keyboard shortcuts. There it is. There's our Pathfinder tools. And we have a variety of what are called shape modes. And these allow us to combine or subtract certain shapes together. So in this case, I have a rectangle and I have a star. If I select both of those and come over to the Pathfinder tools and I click this first option, it's called Unite, it's going to make one shape out of these two shapes. So I can come over here and unite them. And now I get one shape with just this piece of the star hanging on to the side. Let me back up here for a second. Control Z. The next one over here is subtract, or minus the front. So if I do that, it's going to cut the star out of the red. So it's going to cut what's in front, the blue, out of what's behind the red. So if I do that one, I'll end up with a shape that is the red minus this part of the star. And the other thing that I should probably add is that this actually becomes transparent. So if I were to add another rectangle behind, just so that you guys can see this here, let's make that a different color. God, these are awful colors. I'm sorry. Let me go back to my transform and let me, arrange, send to back. It's behind. There you go. I just wanted you guys to be able to see that this cutout becomes transparent on top of the other piece. OK, so let me go back to there. Our third option with both of these selected is right here. And it's going to give me just the intersection of the two shapes. So it's going to give me just that part of the two shapes. And the last piece here is going to give me, that's going to get rid of this middle part and keep the outside here and the rest of this square. So right there, it's, I think I call it the difference or exclude. So I get rid of that piece. And once again, it's transparent. There you go. So you can see through that as a little hole. So that's the first set of Pathfinder tools at the top, or shape modes. Then we get into the actual Pathfinders down below here. And these ones just essentially give us a little bit more flexibility in terms of what's happening. So the first one, if I were to select both, right here, is going to divide this shape so that we get three separate shapes. So not too much happened when I pressed the divide shape. Now, however, if I came in and I used my direct select tool, the white arrow, and I clicked on any one of these shapes, I can actually separate them out. So I have three separate pieces here, rather than just the one piece. So likewise, let me back up. There. This one is going to trim. Oh, wait, I didn't go back far enough. Sorry. There we go. Those two. This one is going to leave me with the front shape, but also trim out the back shape. So it's essentially very similar to the one above it, the minus the front. The difference is I get to keep the shape on top, as opposed to having that go away. This one here is merge. It merges the two shapes together, but I can still actually select them individually and move them after the fact. So merge, to me, this one's not that useful. Let me go back one more. Hold on. All right. This next one is crop. It gives me just this shape that's left. The last one here, outline. I'm not sure what outline does. I've never done outline before. Gives me outlines for those shapes. Not very exciting. And then we do have minus back, which would subtract the back from the front. So all of those Pathfinder modes, I want you to be familiar with them because it's a really easy way of combining shapes. Now, you're not stuck with just the basic shapes. Anything you create with the pen tool can work for this. So let's go ahead and let's start thinking about this in terms of a design. So let's say that I started with, let's do a square here, a square. And I wanted this square to be divided up into different colored regions, for example. So I could take a rectangle like this, and I could put it over the top. So you can see the difference here. And I could Control C, Control V, and I could start to put these together like this. And I could use the Pathfinder tools to divide this shape with these other pieces. So I could select these, for example. I could use the Pathfinders to divide, and I'd end up with individual little segments that are usable and changeable in terms of color. That might not be the best example. Let me go back. Let me try something else. OK, let's say that I wanted to create something custom to cut out of this particular shape. I'll use my pen tool right here. And let's say that I want I want that arc to be cut out of this shape behind. Just for clarity purposes, I'm changing the colors for you. So I could use my Pathfinders, and I could say I want to subtract the front, and now I end up with that particular shape. So it doesn't have to be one of the preset shapes. It could be any of the shapes that you can come up with. And that's important for you to understand. So use the pen tool to create the kinds of things that you want. If we wanted to add in some text instead, we can work with that. Let me get rid of this. I'll go back to my shape here. Let me go into my type tool. And I can come over here to my characters. And we can look through the various fonts that are available. I can also change the size. I may need it a lot bigger than that. So let's go. All right. And actually, you know what? I'm just going to stick with just the G. There. I could, for example, take this, and let's say that I wanted this to be subtracted out of that blue. I can take my type, I can go up to type, and then create outlines right here to make an object out of my type. And then I could do the same thing where I could take this logo and I could subtract the G out of the logo, for example. So anything that you can create, any shape that you can create, you can use. I might get a little bit more creative with this. Maybe maybe I'd move it so that it overlaps just a little bit through that edge. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do it right there. And then I'll go into Type, Create Outlines. I'm going to use my Direct Select to select this point and that point. And I'm going to move them so that they extend beyond out like that. Then I'll take these two and I'll subtract so that I get that G pulling out. I don't know that that's ultimately what I want. I'm just playing around with these ideas. Does that make sense? If I wanted to modify a shape, so let's say I have this square, but I really want there to be a diamond on the bottom. I can go into the pen tool. I could add an anchor point right in the center. Oops. Helps if I actually click on the line. There it is. Then I could go back to my direct select, select that point, pull it down, and I can modify that shape. Now that I have that shape modified, maybe I want to modify this shape. Maybe I want to take another shape out of that shape. Let me go into my transform here. Am I not seeing it? There we go. I didn't have to. Maybe I'll pull that down. Remember, I can use my align tools, so I could select both of these tools. Oh, hold on a second. Let me change the color on this just so you can see it. All right, I could take these. I could come over to align here, make sure the objects are aligned center. If I didn't want the blue object to move, I could pick that as my key object and then align to center. It works just the same as InDesign in terms of the align tools. I could come back to Pathfinder. I could subtract that part of the object in front. Then I could say, you know what? I really wanted this to have an outline instead. I could then come over to my stroke and I could thicken up that outline. Like that. And then maybe I want there to be another. Oops. Sorry, I'm going back to the pen tool. I'm creating this stuff on the fly, so I can't make promises that it's going to turn out good. I'm going to draw just half of this. All right, and then I could take this particular piece, I could copy it, I could go to Edit and then Paste. I could right-click and go to Transform, and I could reflect it. We want to reflect it vertically. There's that piece. And I could put that there. And then I need to clean up the ends here. And I would turn to one of my neighbors and I'd say, you know, how does that look? And they'd say, it looks like the Transformers logo. And I'd be like, yeah, that wasn't what I was going for. And then maybe I'd modify it. So again, that was not my intent. It was just kind of what happened. So this is where you have to kind of play around with things and start to figure out what feels right to you. And it's definitely part of the design process. I mentioned a couple things in the handout here, like the color palettes. Don't worry so much about color palettes yet. If you want to revisit color palettes after Wednesday's lecture, at that point it's probably more appropriate because I'm going to talk a lot more about colors at that point. Just trying to think if there's anything else. No. Remember, under part 3, talk to your neighbor. That is mandatory. You have to actually talk to your neighbor today. For some of you, that's not a problem. You like to talk all the time. For some of you, that will be more challenging. So make sure you do it. And have fun with this. It should be a fun project. It should be something that you enjoy doing and should enjoy working on. OK? So I'll turn you loose now. If you run into any questions, by all means, let me know. But hopefully everything seems rather self-explanatory.